And joining us now, Marco Rubio from the great state of Florida and longtime friend of this program. We're glad he's with us. Senator Rubio, how are you, sir?
Good. I'm doing well. Thank you for asking. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. You know, of course I'd have you on, and this is a big issue, and we have a limited amount of time, so I want to make sure I get through all the points and that people can follow this, because we find out that this is an 844-page bill so far. And as you just heard me say, so far, liberals are pretty happy. So I'm looking at the tweets and the emails coming into our website. They're coming in real time. And one of the main points is, isn't it reasonable for these conservatives to assume that you've been duped here?
No, it isn't, because the fact of the matter is that this bill reflects principles that I issued back in January on immigration reform that were different from the principles the president had laid out. In essence, they've come to our position. We haven't gone to theirs. If you recall clearly early on in these talks when we were talking about this immigration reform stuff, the president and Janet Napolitano and others, for example, clearly said that they wanted no triggers at any kind. They didn't want border security or e-verify or anything at all to have anything linked whatsoever to the green card process, and this bill does that. The president gave a speech, I think it was in Las Vegas in January, about immigration reform. He completely neglected to mention a viable guest worker program, which is critical for our economy. This bill has that. So the fact that they've now moved towards our position on some of these issues may be a tactical decision on their part. But I think it's also an indication that we've established a very reasonable place to be, that they simply don't have ground to stand on and oppose.
Okay, let's go point by point here, because in the proposal, as I understand it, and I haven't read all 844 pages, but I have the summary in front of me, and apparently there is one provision that I have to ask you a question first. Did you support the president's amnesty by fiat of the so-called dreamers, those under the age of, I think it was 30, 28?
No, I thought Congress should have done something about that issue. I think that's the wrong procedural approach.
But did you?
I think it's also bad for the country to do it that way.
Okay, but do you agree that the dreamers should have gotten this kind of regularized status, whether it was by the president or by Congress?
I think kids that were brought to this country at a young age against their not because they came here on their own or made that decision, but because their parents brought them here, have grown up here their entire lives, have something to contribute to our future, should be treated differently than adults who
because
came here willfully and violated our laws.
Right, so just so people understand this, in 5 years, that group of people arbitrarily, the age group arbitrarily set by executive fiat by this president, those people in 5 years are eligible for both a green card and immediately thereafter citizenship. Is that not true?
Well, first of all, those people, as you described them, are young people that have to have graduated from high school or served 4 years in the military, have to be gainfully employed, are building their future on advanced education, have not committed any
those are all
crime.
required. We will absolutely verify they've always been employed, never received government benefits.
Well, you don't qualify for government benefits when you're on temporary status. You don't qualify for them, so they won't be able to be on government benefits.
Well, we know for a fact from the IRS expose that's been done is that the IRS has actually given benefits to people who are here illegally by giving them.
You're talking about the earned income.
Right.
You're talking about the
$5,000.
Well, that's a whole separate issue. I mean, that's in the tax code, and that should be fixed.
That's not fixed in this bill, though. That's not addressed in this bill.
They don't qualify for welfare. They don't qualify for food stamps. People that are in temporary status don't qualify for those things now. And in fact, in this bill, we expanded to mean they don't qualify for Obamacare either. By the way, you don't qualify for federal benefits the first 5 years after you receive a green card either. And beyond all of this, in order to get a green card, you have to prove that you're not a public charge. And we strengthen that in the statutes by actually putting a specific income level per person. Under 125% of the poverty level.
Right. And those who are eligible for this new process have to have come here before December 31st, 2011, which is what I'm reading in the summary.
Correct. And the burden of proof is on them to prove not just that they came here before that date, but that they've been continually present.
The burden of proof is on them. How will that practically play out? Will that be an affidavit written by them and two of their friends, or what will that be?
No, you have to produce documentation. And
what type of documentation? What type?
Well, for example, the combination of doctor records or school enrollment records or bank statements, utility statements.
But that doesn't prove that they've been in the country continuously, does it? If they have a bank account?
Well, it does. If you have, for example, bank statements that show continuing deposits over a series of months, in addition to school records that show that you've been enrolled, in addition to electrical records that show that you've had electrical billing at your house for a
Yeah, but you can go to Mexico for a month and still get billed for your electricity. I mean, I'm not trying to be nitpicky
like any law,
here.
Obviously, I mean, if any law is susceptible to some level of fraud, but we certainly tried to tighten that up. I mean, the bottom line is what we're trying to prevent here is a rush on the border where people decide they can come in tomorrow and take advantage of this because they're reading in the newspaper about this new initiative.
You've been in the room with folks like Schumer and Menendez and Durbin on this issue, and do you not get the sense from them that they simply want to allow as many folks as possible to enter the country as quickly as possible? Does that come out of the discussions with them? Because I've watched their speeches.
Look, I think bottom line is that it's pretty clear that those who find their political home on the left want a much more generous policy when it comes to those that are here illegally, including, I mean, if it was up to many on the left, that they would grant citizenship today, tomorrow, in 3 years, in 5 years. We've seen these proposals be floated before. I'm not looking for a punitive effort here. I'm not trying to decide let's punish these people severely for what they've done by violating the immigration laws. I'm just trying to, I think it's a misnomer. Okay, let me just back up. This is an important point to make. It is a myth that if you have violated our immigration laws, you can never get a green card and you can never become a citizen. Under current law, you can. That's a myth. Under current law, if you have violated our immigration laws, you have to leave the country, and you can get a green card in 10 years. The problem is that many of these people that are here now have been here for a decade or longer. Their kids are U.S. citizens. They have jobs. They own homes. They're not going to leave unless you literally go and apprehend them, put them on a plane, and send them back. Now, we should do that if they're criminals. But if they're not, we're not going to do that. And if someone thinks we are, then they should file a bill to require that. Otherwise, all I have said is, well, okay, for the millions of people that are here now, if they're not going to go back home and get a green card in 10 years, what's an alternative to that is actually harder than doing that? And that's what I've tried to come up with here. I've come up with a process that takes longer than 10 years, that's more expensive.
Except for the people who are here under the age of 28 or 30. They all can become citizens in 5 years and vote.
That alone is not enough. You can't just be under the age of 28 or 30. You have to have proven that you came here at a date certain in the past. You have to have a GED or high school diploma.
But Marco, if you cross the border, as you said, no fault of your own, how do you prove anything? I mean, this all becomes a big guessing game. That's the idea that you can prove stuff. I mean, yeah, you can show that you were enrolled in school and all that. I understand that, but
right. For those that are under that age, you have to have graduated from high school or a GED and have to be working either towards a business or have working towards an advanced degree. You can prove that you've been in school. How did you graduate high school if you weren't continuously enrolled? So my point is that it's not just because if you're a 30-year-old gangbanger who dropped out of high school and have been committing crimes and just haven't gotten caught, you're not going to qualify for either of the programs, quite frankly.
All right, so let's look at a couple of the other provisions in here, and so we understand what's going on. Section 1107, are you familiar with that section?
Well, go ahead. I mean, I don't have it in front of me, so I don't know. Go ahead. I'm familiar with the provision.
Yeah. Eligibility for grants. Because in 844 pages, as you can imagine, there's quite a lot of interesting nuggets in here.
Right.
You actually can be eligible for a grant for a phone, it looks like. A 2-year grant program to receive a cellular phone. And the articles this morning, as you can imagine, are fairly amusing. Move over Obama phone. This is the amnesty phone. What's going on with phones?
That's false.
Okay.
That's not for the illegal immigrant. That's for U.S. citizens and residents who live in the border region, so that they can have access to call. One of their complaints is that's actually part of the Kyle border bill that we adopted. And what it does is it provides communication equipment to people who are living in the border region so they can report illegal crossings, because many of them either don't have phone service or don't have cell phone service, and they have no way of calling.
I know it's not for the actual
agency.
I know it's not for the illegal immigrants, but it is an outlay of money, is it not?
Well, again, that's part of a border security package, that all of which is paid for through the fees and fines that we're charging as part of this program. I mean, that is actually a border security measure that we've adopted, and it's involved to help rural citizens who live along the border to have access to communication equipment so they can call police and they can report border violence. Because one of the complaints we got from the border region is they don't have any way to communicate with police or border patrol in time if they see something happening on the border. So this is designed to help them in that regard. It's not some effort to provide phone service to anybody.
Okay, no, that's okay. I don't really. That's not really something that bothers me. It just seems like that's I'm not sure why that's even in here, but I guess I get your point.
Well, the reason why it's there is because the people on the border tell us.
But they don't have cell phones.
Some of those regions don't have cell phone coverage. They're mountainous regions, they're remote regions and rural areas of the border. I mean, some of the most desolate places in the country. That's why people cross illegally there.
Right, I understand. It seems to be where those people are now the de facto enforcing the border with the cell phones. I mean, to me it seems like it's difficult. Let's move on though. Reagan's amnesty made California a democratic state. I think you could argue. And do you have any fear on your part that this is the end of the GOP as a national party, given what amnesty did to California?
Yeah. I think, first of all, that notion is based on the idea that people who are of immigrant descent are preponderantly inclined to one day become and remain liberal voters. I think that California, by and large, is a state that's grown in its liberal population, and I just don't think that's necessarily all been driven by immigration.
What is it driven by?
True. Well, first of all, let's be clear. Some of these immigrant populations who are legally here, they're not growing because of immigration. They're growing because of birth rate. For example, the Hispanic vote in America is not driven by immigration. There are only 1 million people a year who legally immigrate to the U.S., and not all of them are Hispanic, obviously. What's driving Hispanic growth in not just California, but in Florida, Texas, and across the country is birth rate, not immigration. Second, I would say to you that I've always rejected the idea that somehow our principles are not principles that we can sell to people.
Well, one of the principles was law and order.
Disagreeing with us. I think the whole conservative movement is dependent on our ability to convince people who don't agree with us now.
Oh, no, I agree with you. I completely agree with you on that. I think that's an excellent point, and I would argue that actually cuts against the argument for comprehensive reform, though, Marco, because I call you Marco because I've known you, Senator
Marco,
Rubio.
That's my name.
Senator Rubio, because
Your Eminence?
Your Eminence, exactly, that's fine too. Because look, the Law and Order Party is a Law and Order Party. Right? So you make the pitch to middle-class voters of immigrant descent or legally here, American citizens, by making the pitch that this is going to make your life better. How will the middle-class voters, middle-class folks in this country here legally now, how will their lives be better, their incomes specifically be increased because of this?
Well, first of all, we have to compare it. We can't compare it to nothing. We have to compare it to the status quo, and the status quo is terrible for them. You basically today are either, if you're a businessman or woman, you may be hiring someone who's illegally here, and you may not know it because their documents they're using are fraudulent. You have no way to prove it. So, number two, you're dealing with the consequences of illegal immigration every single day. You have people in this country illegally right now, millions of people whose children are in schools. They show up at our emergency rooms. They don't have a driver's license, which means they don't have insurance for their car, which means your car insurance rates are going to be higher because of uninsured motorists. Secondly, as far as the salaries are concerned, it is a documented fact that when someone is illegally here, they don't have a lot of leverage to bargain or negotiate with an employer. So they get exploited. They basically work for less money, they get paid less, and there's no way to enforce it. Now you have people that are documented. Now you're going to have an e-verify system to protect that documentation. You no longer have to worry about those who are illegally here undercutting the wages of all of us.
So our wages
because you won't be able to hire someone who's undocumented.
I understand
and the penalties will be so onerous. We're doubling the fines for hiring people illegally.
Okay, and then an e-verify will happen, period.
First of all, we mandate it, and the largest companies in America must have it in place within 24 months.
Okay.
Everyone must have it in place within 4 years. And we strengthen the existing e-verify system within not a universal ID, but by using existing ID information for U.S. people, green card holders and citizens, and for non-U.S. residents, meaning people that are here on temporary or work visas or what have you. They must all receive and get a biometric, tamper-proof photo identification card so that you can match them up to the e-verify.
I got you. And Marco Rubio, I think if people thought you were going to be down at that border enforcing it, I think they wouldn't, be all that worried. I think they know that your intentions are where they're supposed to be. I think they're worried about the people in the room with you. And the people who seem to be beaming today, they're worried about them, not so much you. They're worried about them.
Well, that's why we have to be vigilant. I mean, this is only a starting point. This is going to be a long, open, and extensive process. I keep hearing, all these concerns about it being rushed. I mean, that's not going to be the case. I mean, in fact, the Judiciary Committee won't even begin to deal with this until next month.
Marco Rubio, we really appreciate it. So I wish we had more time. Thank you so much.